75 years ago, something remarkable happened. Over 100 foreign children came to Cambridge without their parents. They spoke little English. They knew no one. They had said goodbye to their parents and families, often at night, at railway stations in cities like Berlin, Cologne, Vienna, and Prague. To stay in their home cities would be very dangerous. Their lives were at risk. In July 1939, on the station platform in Prague, there were tears and sad farewells. One of the children there was Susie Spitzer. Susie was born in Vienna. Her parents, Mother Hansi and Father Leo, were Jewish, but like many Austrian Jews, they weren't particularly religious. In 1934, 1 year after Hitler came to power, their daughter Susie was born. At first, their life was very happy. But all that was to change. When Susie was only 4 years old, her parents put her on a train in the Czech city of Prague. She had a small suitcase packed by her mother. In it were some clothes, some precious family photographs, and her favourite teddy. Susie had a label round her neck with her name on it, and she was put in a carriage with other children. It was July 1939. Susie Spitzer, aged only 4, was on her way to Cambridge. Like most of the children on that train, she would never see her parents again. She would never again see uncles, aunts, cousins, or friends. She was on her way to a new family who would look after her for the rest of her life. A family of strangers. A family in Cambridge. Susie travelled for 2 or 3 days. The train took her across Holland, and then she joined a ship to sail across the North Sea. She had never seen the sea before. That ship took 12 hours to get to England. It docked in Harwich. It was Susie's first glimpse of England. She saw her first English policeman. The children were amazed that the policeman smiled, actually smiled at them. The police they had left behind in Germany, Austria and Czechoslovakia had been far from friendly to them. Some of the older children were housed in a camp at Dovercourt, near Harwich. They spent a very cold winter there. They stayed at Dovercourt until families could be found to look after them. Other children, like Susie, went on to Liverpool Street Station in London and were met by adults who were expecting them. These adults were volunteers who wanted to make sure these foreign children would be well looked after. Susie was met in London by an older refugee child and put on a train to Cambridge. Later that day, 4-year-old Susie Spitzer, clinging on to her new friend's hand, arrived at Cambridge Station. There on the platform, she was met by Mr. and Mrs. Chadwick. They lived in Ditton Lane, just outside Cambridge. They had agreed to take in this complete stranger, to give her a new home and a new sister, their daughter Anne, who was only 2 years old. Mr. and Mrs. Chadwick took Susie and Anne back to their home in Cambridge. Susie spoke no English, and she must have been very bewildered, but gradually she became part of her new family. Over the next few months, she learned English and played with Anne, and started to feel more at home. Letters arrived from her mother and father, still in Prague. But then the letters stopped. Susie's parents fell silent. She never heard from them again. They were murdered by the Nazis. They were 2 out of 6 million people who died in the Holocaust. 6 years before Susie came to live with the Chadwicks, in 1933, Adolf Hitler had come to power in Germany. He was head of the Nazis, a racist party who hated Jewish people. The Nazis passed laws stripping Jews of their rights, taking away their businesses, forbidding them to work with non-Jews, or even to go to school. Then, on the night of the 9th of November 1938, things for the Jews suddenly became much worse. Hitler's government ordered a mass attack on Jewish property all through Germany and Austria. Hundreds of synagogues were burnt to the ground. Jewish-owned shops and businesses were destroyed. Jewish men were taken out in the middle of the night, beaten up and sent off to concentration camps. It was known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, because the Nazis had smashed so many Jewish shop windows. Kristallnacht sent a shockwave of terror throughout the Jewish communities of Europe. Susie's parents decided to move from Vienna to Prague, hoping it would be safer there. But in the spring of 1938, Prague was occupied by Hitler's army. Susie and her family were trapped. Like other Jews, they were forced to wear a yellow star. The yellow star was a symbol to mark Jewish people out from other people. It was a symbol of hatred. Susie's parents feared for their lives and for Susie, so they put her on one of the rescue trains to Britain. These became known as the Kindertransport, the child transports. Susie came to the Chadwick family thanks to Mrs. Greta Burkill. Greta helped set up the committee of local volunteers who would look after Susie and Jewish children like her. Greta lived in Chaucer Road with her husband, who was a professor at the university, and their 3 children. On the 10th of November 1938, Greta heard all about Kristallnacht on the radio and in the newspaper. She was horrified and determined to do something. So, with other volunteers, she helped set up the Cambridge Children's Refugee Committee. People who knew Greta Burkill remember her as a rather small lady with a huge amount of energy, a ready smile for refugee children, and a stubborn streak that meant she didn't take no for an answer. Above all, she was very kind and caring.
Mrs. Burkill, of course. She was
yeah.
like a little bird.
Yeah, she was.
Very
yes,
small,
yes.
high heels,
Yeah, that's right,
running
yeah.
from one
Yeah,
place to the other.
yeah.
But she was so warm-hearted.
Yeah,
She was
yeah,
such a
yeah,
lovely
she was.
woman.
Greta Burkill was a very important member of the committee. Some 70 refugee children came to Cambridge in the first months of 1939. It was Greta's job to ensure these children got the very best schooling. Miss Catley, headmistress of the Perse Girls' School, offered free places to many refugee children. The committee also looked for good training places to help the older ones into occupations such as teaching and nursing. Laura Michel was one of many young women who trained at Hillingdon Hospital as a nurse. When war broke out in September 1939, hundreds more refugee children were evacuated to East Anglia. In the 8 months up to the outbreak of war, nearly 10,000 children were brought out of continental Europe to find safety in Britain. The Kindertransports were stopped on the 1st of September 1939. That day, 250 children were waiting on a train in Prague, ready to travel to London. But war was looming, and the borders were closed, so the train never left the station. Nearly all these children died in the Holocaust. Thanks to the Kindertransport, Susie had managed to escape the Nazis, and thanks to Greta, she had found a loving home with the Chadwick family. Greta knew that Susie was happy with the Chadwicks because it was her job to make sure that the refugee children were well looked after. The committee regularly inspected the families, found the children school places in Cambridge, got hold of money to look after them, provided them with pocket money, uniforms, health care, and eventually jobs or training places. Later in life, Susie became a highly trained nurse and made her new parents, Mr. and Mrs. Chadwick, very proud. Sometimes committee members would take in children themselves. One, Mrs. Hutton, looked after Laura Michel, who came to Cambridge on the Kindertransport in 1939 and lived with the Huttons for several years. Greta took in a German Jewish orphan boy Harry Gratzer, who grew up with her family. The committee worked every day throughout the war, without any pay, to make sure that the refugee children were happy. They even set up a social club for the children at 55 Hills Road. It was known as the 55 Club. The Jewish refugee children had a place where they could meet friends, play table tennis, enjoy dancing, watch films, and have parties. The building is still there today, but not many people know that it housed the 55 Club during the war. Today, very few people in Cambridge have heard of Greta Burkill, but there are many who say that they owe their lives to people like Greta and the others on her committee. Greta and the Cambridge Children's Refugee Committee stood up against injustice and were determined to stop the senseless murder of innocent children. They knew that they should offer hope and new life to young people who otherwise might have been killed. They heard Greta's call. We must save the children.